Somewhere deep inside a landfill, buried beneath a mountain of discontinued ecto cooler boxes, empty cans of Crystal Pepsi, petrified Pogs, and the cursed ET Atari game cartridges are the master tapes of your childhood. No, seriously. If you try to go back and find high quality, pristine footage of one of the most creatively unhinged, visually psychotic pieces of television ever broadcast to an entire generation of children, you can't. It doesn't exist. The corporate overlords literally took the physical tapes and recorded over them. They wiped it away from existence like it was a bad timeline in a Marvel movie. But before it was metaphorically lost in space, this bizarre little experiment managed to do something impossible. It smuggled an anarchic MTV-style sketch comedy show directly into the brains of millions of unsuspecting 7-year-olds while they were eating their Fruity Pebbles. Oh, and right under our noses, it secretly birthed one of the most famous billion-dollar television characters in human history. A character you definitely know, hiding inside a sweaty rubber gorilla suit. You didn't hallucinate that weird clown. You didn't hallucinate the singing teenagers and their aggressive shoulder pads. And you definitely didn't hallucinate the green guy telling you that no Gnews is good Gnews. So strap in, hang on tight, because we're boarding the Great Space Coaster. The Great Space Coaster first aired in 1981, which is important because the early 80s were a very specific time in children's entertainment. This was the era when television executives looked at kids and said, what if we taught them about friendship, but also sold them cereal with enough sugar to power a lawnmower? You had Sesame Street doing elite educational television. You had Saturday morning cartoons turning every toy aisle into a tiny plastic war zone. You had He-Man, Smurfs, Care Bears, Thundercats, Rainbow Bright, and approximately 9,000 bears with belly symbols all fighting for emotional market share. And then here comes the Great Space Coaster, walking into the room like, what if a clown escaped the circus, stole a roller coaster, flew it through space, and took 3 musicians to an asteroid full of talking puppets? And some executive apparently said, perfect, but can we add a Gnu with a Gnews desk? This is why the 80s cannot be replicated. The premise was simple, and the way a trapper-keeper full of Lisa Frank dolphins is simple. 3 young performers, Francine, Danny, and Roy, ride a roller coaster-like spaceship piloted by Baxter the Clown to a magical asteroid called Coasterville. Yes, Coasterville. Not Mars. Not Jupiter. Not Planet Learning Time. Coasterville. Because apparently naming planets in the 80s worked the same way as naming off-brand theme parks near interstate exits. Francine, Danny, and Roy were the human anchors of the show. They sang, learned lessons, interacted with the puppet characters, and acted shockingly calm for people who were regularly commuting to space with a clown. Baxter the Clown would drive his space coaster around and offer to pick up kids off the side of the road and take them to his asteroid. Which, now that I say that out loud, sounds less like a kid's show and more like an episode of Dateline To Catch a Predator. But in 1981, that was Tuesday. To understand why this show felt like a fever dream, you have to understand the mad scientists who cooked it up, specifically a guy named Kermit Love. Now, if you hear the name Kermit and immediately think of a frog or a very specific type of meme-sipping tea, you're in the right cinematic universe. Kermit Love was a master puppet maker who worked intimately with Jim Henson. In fact, Kermit Love was the guy who physically built Big Bird and Mr. Snuffleupagus. He was absolute royalty in the world of educational television, but by the late 70s, the landscape was getting a little stale. Sesame Street was a masterpiece, sure, but it was PBS. It was heavily regulated by child psychologists who probably wore tweed jackets and worried about our attention spans, and Jim Martin became one of the show's key creative and performing forces. So while the Great Space Coaster looked like something your brain invented during a fever dream after overdosing on too many Flintstones vitamins, it was actually made by people who seriously knew what they were doing. That's what makes it fascinating. This was not random chaos. This was professionally engineered chaos. Like if NASA built a bouncy castle. Now let's talk about the inhabitants of Coasterville, because this asteroid had a stronger roster than a 1992 Pizza Hut commercial break. First, there was Baxter the Clown, the gentle space coaster pilot. Baxter was sweet. Baxter was kind. Baxter seemed like he gave really good hugs and also occasionally saw dead people. He was also constantly running from empty promises a creepy ringmaster who wanted to drag him back to the circus. And yes, MT Promises is a perfect villain name. That name sounds like a landlord, a politician, and a guy selling fake Beanie Baby investments all at once. Then there was Gorilla Gorilla, performed by someone who would go on to birth one of the most famous billion-dollar television characters in human history. A character you definitely know, hiding inside a sweaty rubber gorilla suit, but more about that in a minute. There was Edison the elephant, who looked like a children's librarian, had been genetically combined with a couch cushion. There was Knock Knock the Woodpecker, because what every educational space asteroid needs is a bird with vaudeville comedian energy. There were the Huggles, which sound adorable until you realize Huggles is also absolutely what a 1987 cereal mascot would call children before leading them into a commercial for marshmallow toothpaste. There was Rory, a video jockey lion-type character from the Rockin' with Rory segments, because this show eventually looked at MTV and said, "That's what we are missing." But what if the VJ had fur and lived near a space clown? Again, the 80s. No rules, just vibes, puppets, and probably the asbestos in the school ceiling didn't help things. And then there was Gary Gnu.
This is Gary Gnu, and the No Gnews is Good Gnu show.
Gary Gnu was the breakout icon. A green puppet newscaster with a hard G sound and a catchphrase that burrowed into the collective subconscious like a Saturday morning earworm wearing leg warmers.
And the No Gnews is Good Gnu show.
That line should not work. It is barely a joke. It is essentially a dad pun wearing a puppet head. And yet, it works perfectly. Gary Gnu had the energy of a local news anchor who got stuck covering a county fair goat costume contest and decided this was the day his soul left his body. He would sit there, deliver fake reports, complain, react, overpronounce words, and somehow become the part of the show that adults still remember decades later. Because kids love two things: nonsense, and adults taking nonsense way too seriously. Gary understood this. Gary did not wink at the camera. Gary committed. Gary Gnu treated fake puppet journalism with the intensity of a man breaking the Watergate scandal, except the scandal was probably a banana has gone missing from Gordo's dressing room. And honestly, that's journalism we can trust. The genius of The Great Space Coaster is that it understood something modern kids' shows sometimes forget. Kids do not need everything polished until it looks like an app icon. They need rhythm. They need characters with strong silhouettes and stronger emotional issues. They need songs, jokes, recurring bits, little mysteries, and puppets who look like they were built by someone who had imagination, felt, and maybe too much coffee. The show mixed music, puppetry, live action, animation, celebrity guests, lessons, and recurring segments. The Peabody Board even praised that exact blend: animation, puppets, live action, music, and guest stars as part of what made the show appealing and instructive. But it never felt like homework. It felt like recess had escaped into television. There were lessons, sure, but they were wrapped in so much color and motion that you didn't realize you were being educated until years later when you accidentally handled conflict better than Skeletor. The humans sang songs. The puppets sang songs. Gary did Gnews. Roy had a little portable screen that played short films and animated segments. And one of those recurring animated segments was Linea, the Italian cartoon about a little line-drawn man who argues with his animator in gibberish. You'd be sitting there eating cereal, and suddenly, a minimalist European lineman animation was yelling at the god hand that created him. That is culture. That is why our generation is the way we are. We were raised by DuckTales, Reading Rainbow, Pee-wee's Playhouse, Scholastic Book Fair erasers, and unexplained European animation dropped into syndicated children's shows with no warning. No wonder we all grew up anxious and creative. The show also had a musical identity that made it feel less like a lesson and more like a tiny off-Broadway show staged inside a Toys R Us after closing. And again, the people making it knew puppetry. That matters, because a bad puppet is terrifying. A bad puppet looks like it knows your browser history, but a good puppet becomes real. Gary Gnu became real. Goriddle became real. Baxter became real. Not because they looked perfect, but because performers gave them rhythm, personality, timing, and life. That is why this show stayed in people's heads. Not as a full memory, as fragments. A face A song, a catchphrase, a strange set, a feeling. The same way you may not remember an entire episode of Muppet Babies, but you absolutely remember the wallpaper in the nursery and the emotional security of hearing that theme song. Memory does not keep childhood in perfect order. Memory keeps childhood like a messy VHS shelf. Half-labeled tapes. One says, Christmas 1993. One says, do not tape over. One somehow contains 3 episodes of Alf, a local carpet commercial, and your cousin's dance recital. That's where the Great Space Coaster lives. Now here's the sad part, but don't worry, we're not fully going into Sarah McLachlan commercial with abandoned puppets mode yet. Because the Great Space Coaster did not disappear because nobody cared. It ran for years. 250 episodes. It won awards. It had serious talent. It had a soundtrack. It had fans. And yet today, compared to something like Sesame Street or Fraggle Rock, it feels strangely hard to access. Like it fell behind the entertainment center of history, and nobody wants to move the big wooden TV cabinet because that thing weighs 900 pounds and is probably hiding the bones of your long-lost pet cat, Mr. Whiskers. The major villain here appears to be rights and preservation, especially music rights. And music rights are where nostalgia goes to fill out forms until it dies. Because when a show uses songs, covers, performances, and musical segments, releasing it again decades later can become incredibly complicated and expensive. Somewhere, there is probably a spreadsheet standing between us and a clean release of the Great Space Coaster. A spreadsheet! The most boring villain imaginable, MT promises was creepy, but at least he had flair. A rights clearance spreadsheet just sits there in a beige cubicle whispering, actually, track 7 requires additional negotiation. And then there's the issue of old master tapes. When the show eventually ended its syndication run, the physical master tapes were shuffled around into storage. And in the television industry of the 1980s, magnetic tape was expensive. Storage space was expensive. If a show wasn't currently making money in reruns, executives considered it dead weight. It is widely believed that the vast majority of the original pristine master tapes for the Great Space Coaster were wiped, just recorded over, tossed in the dumpster. Think about that for a second. Over 200 episodes of brilliant, handcrafted puppetry and legitimate television history gone, erased. They probably recorded over Gary Gnu so some local TV station could air a rerun of Charles in Charge or a 30-minute infomercial for a food dehydrator. The only reason you can watch any of it today is because of the fans. It survives purely as a patched-together Frankenstein monster of old VHS recordings. Kids who happened to leave a blank Maxwell tape running in their VCR in 1983 while they went to school. That's why every single clip of this show you find on YouTube looks like it was filmed through a jar of mayonnaise. It literally is a fever dream now, because the physical proof of its existence has been degrading in cardboard boxes in our parents' basements for 40 years. But I promised you a secret. I told you that this weird little asteroid birthed a legend.
We interrupt this rediscovery of television history to ask, do you want to be a part of television history? If you support the show through the link below by becoming a Nostalgia member or donating a gift, your name gets read on a future episode of Fever Dream Nostalgia. Not only does your donation help preserve the memory of these shows, your name will also be preserved alongside the most beautifully unhinged children's programming ever made. Also, in This Matters, I will use your contributions to buy treats for my 16 dogs. You heard that right, 16 dogs. The link is below. Your legacy awaits. Now back to our regular scheduled programming.
Remember Gorittle Gorilla? The big, goofy, soft-spoken primate who hung out on the asteroid? The man inside that sweaty, heavy suit performing that character was a young, incredibly talented puppeteer who was just cutting his teeth in the industry. He learned the ropes of television production, character acting, and comedic timing on the Great Space Coaster. When the show was unceremoniously dumped, he took those skills, walked over to Jim Henson, and was handed a scrap of red fur that nobody knew what to do with. That puppeteer was Kevin Clash, the man who created the voice, the soul, and the absolute global dominance of Elmo. Elmo, the character that saved Sesame Street, sold billions of dollars in toys, and caused the great Tickle Me Elmo Black Friday Mall riots of 1996, owes his structural comedic DNA to a guy sweating inside a gorilla suit on a fake asteroid in a syndicated variety show that corporate executives threw in the literal garbage. Jim Martin,
performed Gary Gnu and MT Promises, among others, which means one person was both the weird green news anchor and the creepy circus villain. That's range. That's like finding out the same guy played both Bob Ross and the Crypt Keeper. The show also had guest stars, including names like Mark Hamill, Marvin Hamlish, and others. Imagine being a child in the 80s and seeing Luke Skywalker casually appear in the same universe as Gary Gnu. No explanation. No cinematic universe. No end credit scene. Just Mark Hamill, puppets, music, and a clown with a space vehicle. Marvel could never. Actually, Marvel probably would. Give it time. It's weird to think about things just disappearing. We live in an age of abundance. Everything is archived. Everything is on a server. If you want to watch a show from 5 years ago, you press a button and it's there in 4K resolution. But the Great Space Coaster belongs to a different era. An era of permanence and impermanence. You couldn't pause it. You couldn't binge it. You had to be there, sitting on the scratchy carpet of your living room, usually while it was still dark outside, bundled in a blanket before the school bus arrived. It was a private club. If you saw the angry line guy that morning, and your friend saw the angry line guy that morning, you had a shared experience that bonded you on the playground. When we look for these old shows now, we aren't really looking for Gary Gnu. I mean, the jokes are cute, but we're adults. We're looking for the feeling of being that age again. And maybe there is something deeply poetic about the fact that the Great Space Coaster lost its master tapes. Because that's how memory works, isn't it? You can't go back and access the pristine 4K master file of your childhood. You can't perfectly replay the morning your mom made you toast while you watched Baxter fly the coaster. You just have the degraded VHS tape in your head. It's a little blurry, the audio drops out sometimes, you remember the feeling of the carpet, the smell of the kitchen, the glow of the screen, but the details are fuzzy. It's a fever dream. We spend so much time wishing we could get it all back exactly the way it was. But the truth is, the magic isn't in the master tapes. The magic is in the fact that it happened at all, and that for a few minutes every morning, before the world demanded you grow up, you gotta take a ride to an asteroid
Where no Gnews is good Gnews.
Keep those tapes safe, guys, even the blurry ones.
If the Great Space Coaster was part of your childhood, drop a comment. Tell me what you remember. Also, I read all your comments and use those suggestions to choose what show to cover next. So please leave me in the comments which show you want me to cover next. But before we go, I also have to give a very special shout out to the very first person to officially support the show, Anubis at the Feather 47. You are member number 1, the original, the pioneer. Somewhere out there, 16 dogs just got a treat because of you. And they have absolutely no idea who you are, but I do. Thank you for believing in the fever dream. You're in the history books now, and if this video brought back a core memory, please hit the subscribe button or the like button, because we do this every week. We go back for the stuff that almost got away. No Gnews is good Gnews. See you next time.